Hey, Mercy Street family, our birthday was this past Saturday and we gathered on Zoom together, so we didn't have a recording, but I wanted to share just a brief part of my sermon from our 23rd birthday. I'm here back at the church in my office, which I've not spent that much time since COVID started, but we are regathering now on campus every single Saturday, 5:30. Here was the message. I preached from the book of Joel. Joel was one of the prophets who wrote during 700, 800 BC. And Joel's prophecy was written during a time in which there was a lot of political unrest, in which there were a lot of questions. Where is God? And the role of the prophet was always this. It was to remind the people who God is and who they are. And so the reason I shared this message from Joel is to remind us who God is and to remind us who we are. It was our 23rd birthday, and the title of the sermon is 23 and We, our spiritual DNA of Mercy Street. Those 23andMe tests, you can get information about who you are related to, some of your ancestors, well-known stories that have been kept secret. You get a sense of those that have shared your DNA, your blood, those who looked out on a Saharan sunset or perhaps stared across the Irish Channel. And at Mercy Street, this has been an interesting year of 2020, but we are given the chance to kind of think again about our DNA. And so the passage from Joel has been on my mind for two reasons. It contains the words, God says to the people, though you have faced a lot of destruction, though the locusts have eaten everything, I will restore the years that the locusts have taken. This is actually what the passage says. God says in Joel chapter 2, verse 25, I will make up for the years of the locust, the great locust devastation. Locusts that savaged, deadly locust, fierce locust, locust of doom. That great locust invasion that I sent your way, one day you will eat your fill of good food. You'll be full of praises to God, the God who has set you back on your heels in wonder. Never again will my people be despised. And friends, during this time of 2020, we maybe can't relate to what the locusts have eaten, the devouring locust, in this case, the prophecy of Joel. Their entire crops, all of their fields had been devastated. But for us, what political polarization left behind, COVID destroyed. What COVID left behind, the racial tensions destroyed. What racial tensions left behind, our mental frailty destroyed. And what mental frailty left behind, virtual schooling destroyed. You get the idea. So part of our spiritual DNA, our 23 and we story, is that God will always restore the years that the locusts have eaten. God will restore all of the dismantling and disruption that has happened during this time. And so the prophet's job was to call to the people, remember who God is. God is the one that restores. And the second thing the prophet always does is calls the people to respond to this message. And I think our response is this, Mercy Street family. Our response is to fast. Now, in some ways, we have already been fasting together these last 6.5 months. We have been fasting from corporate worship. Yeah, we could think about it in terms of the church has been closed or we've not been able to gather together and COVID has kept us from this, and we can feel angry and upset about it. But if we think about it in terms of fasting from being together, because what a time of fasting does is we abstain from something in order to redirect our attention to God. And so we have been fasting from corporate worship in order to redirect our attention to God. Why is it that we are called to pray? What is the significance of singing together? And so during a time of fasting, here's the other part of the Joel passage which we read together. God, after God restores the years that the locusts have eaten, after God has brought about restoration and our response of fasting, it says, God says, I will pour out my spirit on every kind of people. Your sons will prophesy, and so will your daughters. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. I will pour out my spirit upon servants, men and women both. We are starting to regather together. But what else is it that God is calling us to fast from? How else is God calling us to redirect our attention so that in the midst of our fasting, we may receive anew the Spirit that is being poured out upon us? For we are Easter people. We are people who not in the day of Joel that the Spirit was only poured out on one or two, but we live in a time in which God's Spirit is poured out on all of us. And so God's Spirit is poured out on those who have 30 days sober or 16 days sober or 16 years sober. God's Spirit is poured out upon weary parents, frustrated educators. God's Spirit is poured out upon those who feel like their mental health is going to crumble at any moment. When we fast, when we abstain, and maybe it's abstaining from, for the next several weeks, one meal a week, in order to redirect your attention to what God is doing here and now, and to have that Spirit poured out upon you. Friends, this is our spiritual DNA as a community. That God will bring about restoration even now. And our response is to fast from our fear, to fast from our indignation, to fast from constant time on social media, which just raises our blood pressure. And to fast and to receive again this Spirit that is poured out on all of us. Now more than ever, we need to be praying for and with our Mercy Street community, for our best days are ahead of us. Great things are coming. I love you, Mercy Street family. This is our 23 and We story.